Hello. Oh my gosh. Community-led summit. How are we? It's so fun to be doing a summit over Zoom.
Hello. Oh my gosh.
I can hear myself, so there's a small echo, and I'm not sure where it's coming from, but we'll figure it out over time. Um, I think I'll give people like 2-ish minutes, if that's all right, just to get people back from networking, make sure that everybody's here. Hello in the chat. Oh my God, already people are saying hi and nice things. That's so sweet. Um, cool. And thank you for loving my top. It's vintage. I think we're probably good to get going. Mark, what do you think? Got enough people?
I'm ready.
All right,
Yeah.
let's do it. Okay, so I am Chelsea. I'm the head of product for Commsor, who is hosting this wonderful summit. And through this fireside chat, please feel free to comment in the chat. I'll have it up. And if you have any questions, you can drop them into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to those towards the end. I'm really living for how much the community chat is just like popping with people who like my vibe. And I think that that's really sweet. And it's giving me a lot of energy right now. For today's fireside chat, we are going to be talking to Mark Tan from Wyze about community-led product development. And I'm going to do a quick intro of Mark. Mark is a director of product and community at Wyze, which is a startup that offers affordable smart home products and services. Outside of Wyze, he is a venture fellow at Alumni Ventures Group, where he works with VCs to evaluate startups for investment. And he also teaches part-time at Product School. And last, he runs a nonprofit that mentors young professionals who are interested in pursuing a career in tech. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. Super excited.
Oh, yeah. Well, so let's kick this off with a little bit of a background. So in case anyone who's listening isn't familiar, what is Wyze?
Yeah, so Wyze is a young startup of 3+ years based in Seattle, and we sell smart home devices at an affordable price.
Mm-hmm.
So we've expanded. Our flagship product is a camera, and since then we've launched to other categories like lighting, sensor, and personal wearables as well.
Awesome. That's so cool. I actually have one of your cameras. I think I told you that. Surprisingly, it's a great product. Okay, and what does community look like at Wyze?
So community at Wyze sits in the product work, and we partner a lot with other teams. So I think it's very similar to those who attended the public session. We are cross-product internally because we work with customer support, with marketing, and with other organizations internally. Our community is very strong because we are selling hardware devices, and these are not easy to test. So we really rely on community members to help us grow, give feedback, and ideate so that we can launch new products afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That's fabulous. And so community at Wyze, you said it sits across product.
Yeah.
How many people is it? And they all report into you as the director of product and community?
Yes. So we actually have a fairly large number of community members or team. So we have 4 community managers, 1 beta program manager who also interacts with our community members. Then we have 1 React researcher who also, again, talk to our customers for research. So 6 of us are plus me are part of the same team, and internally we act as the voice of the customer for the company.
Awesome. And before we dig into specifically like that community cross-product marriage, maybe you could just in a couple of sentences describe what does community-led product mean to you?
Oh, I think there's a lot of definition floating around, but for us, it really means integrating your product development with your community members. So making community feel like they are part of building your product and championing your mission. So we take our community members' feedback into heart. We interact with them on a day-to-day basis. So we view them as part of the team, especially the most hardcore community members, and not just customers. So we really take time to look at their feedback to make sure that they feel that they belong with us.
I love that you centered on the word belonging. I think a lot of, and I want to pull apart 2 things before we dive directly into like your org and how it works. But But I love that you centered on belonging and that you're talking about how the community organization at your company is in this very, very high-powered role where it sits under product. I think a lot of people can relate to community sitting under support and feeling kind of like people only see them as like this support driver, or sitting under marketing and people feeling like it only sits under this marketing driver. So I love that Wyze has this like very early perspective where they want it to be part of the way that you build and release product. I think that's really special and cool. What do you think? Actually, let's talk about this. Can you talk to me about the product lifecycle and in general and how you see that interacting with community led approaches?
Sure. So by the way, for context, I come from an engineering and product background. So I'm not a marketing guy or a sales guy. So this perspective is very rooted on product building. So like for those of you who are builders, you'd know that it starts from inception, ideation, testing, development, testing, and launching, right? And then you retain the audience to engagement, ongoing engagement with your efforts. So for us, the community is synonymous to following that customer journey, because at the inception stage, you would then collect feedback or signals whether what you're about to do is something that they'd be interested in, right? So in a community context, we have external wish lists and roadmap where we let people interact with us and also engage with others, and that gives us indication of whether or not they would love us to build this particular feature or not. And then I'm not gonna go through each of the stage, but as we move closer to the launch, that's where they become really excited, because as they participate in testing and see the product come to fruition, then they can actually engage and buy that later. So that's how we view the community in parallel with the product lifecycle.
Yeah, I think a lot in terms of maturity. When I'm talking to other product leaders, I think about maturity in terms of like your product team's maturity and their ability to understand sort of how they should be building with that loop in mind. And I think what you're introducing is almost now there's like a community level maturity. Like, are they prepared to be involved in that full product cycle launch that you're talking about, from ideation, figuring out what you should do, all the way through to making sure that the things you put out there are high quality, and then taking and actioning their feedback at the back end. I think that's really special and cool. So seeing as your team is so widespread across all of those different stages, how do you ensure that you have like focus so that people can be productive while still having that sort of bird's eye view? Like, how do you think about calibrating between those two lenses?
Yeah, that's an ongoing challenge, right? So again, for context, Wyze is 150 employee, and we are 6 in the community, and we're launching a dozen products. So I think it's rooted on what your goal is and what your mission is. So for us, we actually have a team mission. So our community, our cross-product mission is to provide an inclusive space for customers to feel empowered to explore and understand tech. And then but based on that, everything else that we do is rooted on that. So I think it's less about like task by task prioritization. It's more about, is what we're doing something that will resonate to the customers, or or is it something that will add value to them? And if the answer is yes, then we sort of use that as a guiding light. Yeah,
I love that framework. I think something that's always been really interesting to me is how can you give people that sort of broad exposure, but a high level of focus so that they can get specific tasks done and feel productive. And it sounds like for Wyze, because of the nature of where community is sat, they naturally get that broad exposure. And then it sounds like the way that you're thinking about prioritizing work gives them that focus. So that's really cool.
Yeah, and what I always tell the team is that don't think of your role as something that operates in silos, right? Especially in a startup, because you always, especially for a community team that receives all the feedback in all different fronts, like it's our job to make sure that that gets into the right person internally. So we're less obsessed about what is our role as compared to, is this something that's going to help our customers? So because of that, we're very much embedded everywhere internally.
Yeah, it sounds like a dream. Sounds like a beautiful place. I'm curious, for people in the audience, so we have a range of attendees. We have people who are in community management, people who are sort of adjacent in brand marketing, possibly product roles. What advice would you give those people for how to identify if a company is a community-led product company, or how to identify if a product team is community-led?
That's a good question. I think I was watching the previous sessions, and there's a lot of frameworks there. Just to add to that, I think it's important to understand what kind of community you're building. Is it a community of product, a community of practice, community of passion, or community of influencer? So in a nutshell, I belong to the first bucket. And that means using our community, working with our community members to build the products. But as an instructor, for example, for product school, that means building this community of practice for people who want to expand their craft, right? And then passion overlaps with the first one, but that's more broad. And then finally, if you're working with influencers and celebrities, then that can be quote unquote community of passion. So I think that's the first step towards understanding what tools and mechanism that you can use to communicate.
Yeah. And then, so maybe some of the signs that a team isn't as community led, maybe they don't even know which of those buckets they fall into, but they're definitely not trying to fall into one of them. How could a community member sort of take action in that way? I think we heard from the Reddit speaker that Will Katie that value. Please finish the thought for me. It's value creates. Awareness. Value creates awareness.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. He said value creates awareness. So what sort of ways do you think that a community member could start to shift that focus from essentially being like, let's say, sales-led or engineering-led or whatever else led into that sort of community focus? What do you think a community manager could actually do?
I think I'm going to build on top of what you just said. So you can never go wrong trying to fix someone's problem, right? You do that all the time externally, but internally you can do the same thing. So for us, it's really understanding what are the biggest pain points for each of these different teams, whether it's product, sales, marketing, or support. Because if you are able to connect the two, externally and internally, then you can help move the company towards a direction that will enable growth as a whole and then make your customers happy. So I know it's a very high level response, but it's really it. Like how do you think about connecting what will solve internal and external problems? And I think if you have that mindset, the rest will follow.
I do like telling people to start from a mindset of fixer. It can be tough to break it once you get it, but it can get you really, really far to have that mindset of I see problems, I'm going to fix them for people. And that's going to be how I get in the door and start to make more value for myself and make more space for myself at this table. Maybe even create more seats at the table, grow your team, etc. But I love that idea. I do see a lot of questions coming in on the chat that I think are really cool that we can get to as we go. Keep them coming, people. I think they're going to really help us. And I'm wondering if you could tell us about a time where being close partners with your community, and even in your case, being embedded in community while you're building product, has changed your perspective on something, has caused you to make a different decision than you expected.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot because as I've told you, right, the community members have always been part of our product building, but I'm actually not very I used to be someone who doesn't believe as much in community because I felt like it was very nebulous, hard to measure, and it's just hard to grasp, especially in companies who are very focused on, let's say, sales. But there's a story where we made a lot of product decisions, but one recent one is thinking about pricing, right? So our principle is be friends with your customer and don't charge them as much. Don't charge them in a reasonable price, as if you're charging a friend. And there was a lot of global issues around constraints in supply chain and so forth that we actually have to think about increasing the price. And one of the things that we did is we would then consult. We have a messaging that will go out to a lot of customers, but we would also consult with these very core community members who've been with us since day one, just to check if this is something that will resonate with them, or this is something that is not confusing. And those are the pulse checks that allowed us to bring clarity to our communication, because sometimes when you work internally and you're operating in a box, right, you don't really know how customers will react. So we do tend to communicate with them frequently, such as in those scenarios, to make sure that before it gets to our 5 million plus customers, these people will give their feedback to help us improve the message.
Yeah. So really bringing your customers in, or your high tier community members in, to talk about like what is motivating this change. How can we make sure that people understand what's behind it? This isn't just Chelsea hates everyone and wants to raise the price party. This is, a real reason. How can we help everyone understand what's going on?
Yeah, because customers love transparency and honesty, right? And what they love more is not being surprised. So I'm gonna lie if I say everything is perfect. We still have a lot of work to do there. But in every chance that we could, we would check with them at least for the 25 really awesome volunteers that we have, to make sure that their feedback and inputs are considered.
Yeah, and I love that also, because that closed loop of like that they give feedback and then they see you action it, that gives them a positive community experience. So now not only are you improving your product, you're also improving your community experience by ensuring that you take their feedback seriously, you show them you take their feedback seriously, so they'll give you better feedback in the future, and they'll be more likely to actually be involved in that full closed loop of product development. So I really like that.
Yeah.
I put a post out on Twitter a couple days ago that you might have seen, where I asked for some community members to ask us what's on their mind about product development and community. And I got a question from people about how involving community might look different for different companies. And I think this might relate to what you were saying about community for passion versus community for influencers, like all of these different buckets. But I'm wondering if you have anything else to say about like how you think community and product might interact differently, based on if you're a nonprofit, based on if you're an agency style or working for the government, et cetera. Do you have anything to comment on there?
Yeah, I don't think it's actually that different, but I would say that the affiliation towards the mission and the goal is so much stronger when you're working for a nonprofit, right? Because there's no single product, and everyone is trying to build each other and help each other. So I've done this a few times through people who, again, wanting to move into tech, or people who want to accelerate their career, and like the motivation and support that everyone is giving each other is just way more intense, because you know that whatever you do, whether it's giving something to others or taking something to others, all of these efforts will help you grow yourself too. So I think there's a much more intensity and a different dynamics when you're building something for craft versus you are purchasing like a smart home device.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, I used to work at an agency, and it was really different. Even just the concept of going from project to project versus being embedded on a project, it really changes your mindset on how you're building the product and what your goals are even on the product, which is, I think, extends out to the people that you're trying to motivate to care about the community. So another question that I have is how you think community operations might have sort of different maturity levels at different kinds of scales. So we talked about, the product development maturity, and then there's also community maturity. So like if you're at a startup versus a scale up versus an enterprise, that relationship between community and enterprise might look kind of different. So Evan over here in the chat said, we went from the product team trying to avoid the community team to actively funding heads for us. And that brings me so much joy because I think that's like the goal. But how do you think those like relationships might look different at those different tiers?
I'll answer that with a story. So we used to do beta
I love a story.
In Facebook group. So we started with one because we're testing a device, and we bring in like 50 people there. And then as the company matures, we started selling more and more devices, and we had to create different Facebook groups. And imagine one Facebook group growing into 12 Facebook groups with 50 to 100 people overlapping, testing different devices and tracking the feedback. It was a nightmare. So as the company matured last year, we actually migrated to using a testing platform to make sure that we can track this more effectively. And then we also started to explore tools that will allow us to measure community engagement. So there's quite a few that we're looking at right now that will allow us to do that. And I think more and more companies are building tools in this space. I think it's a very exciting time to be in and to work at. But long story, going back to your question, I think it just follows the level of maturity of the company.
Yeah.
So we're now growing into mid-stage. We're still early, but size-wise, we're closing into the crossing that chasm, and that requires a lot of thoughtful processes and tools that we can use to measure value.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear more about how you're building something in-house to help you better measure that engagement from the community. I think that that's amazing. I tend to agree. I have similar stories of that we were running these beta groups that like every PM manually pulled together for their new products that they were putting out. And then all of a sudden we had this reckoning where we had 40 different beta groups, and we were like, that's not probably the best way for us to spend our time. And I do want to shift gears into a couple of the specific questions we got about getting feedback from these different groups. Like, if the whole point is that we want to bring these people in to get feedback, how can we make sure that we get the best feedback so that the product leaders listen and feel like they got value out of participating in this process? And how can we then also ensure that our community members feel like they're actually involved in the process? So to put a finer point on that, how do you think about formatting, and this person specifically asking about events for feedback, but how do you think about making sure that you put that platform out there in the best way possible so that they can give you feedback that's effective?
I think it goes back to the first session where it was mentioned that it's the fundamental belief that community is valuable. So that one is more of a mindset change.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you do that, the way we've done it so far, is we would take screenshots of customer feedback that we think is really insightful, because like everyone, most of the people in the company actually look at our community groups, but it's very noisy, right? There's a lot of posts, comments, and replies, and they don't have the full day to actually monitor it. So we are here as a support to make sure that those gems will be brought in. And a lot of our customers are very, very good. So not only do they respond to specific posts, they would, again, participate in our discourse forum to check our roadmap and wish list. They will give us ideas. And then sometimes we do AMAs too. So these are different avenues where we would tend to get the signals and suggestions of what they would like us to do next. And I think that constant and consistent approach allow the team to really keep the community in mind.
So you're thinking more asynchronous feedback mechanism. So the discourse, I think one that a lot of product leaders can resonate with is forums and surveys and things like that, where you can kind of get a really wide spray. For synchronous, I think, just to provide some other advice, Margot, if you're still listening, is I think for synchronous, I try to do one-on-ones, but I know that those can get really tough. Another mechanism I've had is I have done user testing events that have been kind of interesting and fun in the before times when we were allowed to go outside. And you basically just offer out pizzas and stuff, and you maybe do a quick talk, and then there's a demo table in the back where you let people give you feedback about a product live while you're there, and you take notes. And I've always found that to be a lot of fun because you get to meet the customers in real life, do a little bit of information trade, and they get to put a face to the name, and you get to have a really great interaction with them.
Chelsea, can I add one thing there? In terms of
Totally.
Because I just remembered. So we actually tried to do a couple of ones during our anniversary. We did a career day, a tech demo, and we hired one of our community managers from the audience. So it's actually a good way to build that connection. I don't think you should obsess too much about the metrics because that's very hard to measure, to see. But as you know, you'll meet people there. They get to know you. So it's more qualitative for us, at least, as opposed to measuring metrics.
I have also hired somebody from one of our events. I love doing that. I think that's always so fun. When you meet somebody and they just blow you away and you're like, this person has to work with me. Get over here. No more. We're not talking about this anymore. I love the chat right now. Everybody's so excited. Okay, so another question that I have is, you can't please everyone. What about the minority of the community members that don't see their feedback come to fruition? So how do you deal with stuff that you're not going to do?
Oh, that happens a lot because customers want like 100 things and you only can build 3 out of 100. So like I think it's it really goes back to transparency and honesty. and having that consistent communication. So we don't overpromise. We don't say we're going to build it or this is coming soon. That is going to be very annoying, especially if you're not really, if it's still research phase, you probably shouldn't say that. What really helped us is put structure. So like for example, in the wishlist forum chart that we have, we actually have tags. So is this idea being researched? Is it maybe later, or is it being developed? So allowing those tags will give more clarity as to where this particular product or feature is in the context of everything that we're doing.
Yeah, I similarly have an anecdote about a situation where customers were asking for a feature that my company, HubSpot, at the time felt strongly was not ethical. And that feature was that when you are tracking somebody's email, you send them a tracked email and they open it to be able to see where on the planet that their IP address is pinging from. Yeah. And my company at the time felt that that was not ethical, and we did not believe in that feature. And the way that we handled not doing it, even though customers were requesting it, they were completely well within their rights. They had reasonable use cases. And the way that we dealt with it is that we felt we had to be just honest about where we were coming from, that it is not something that we want to pursue. And so we tried to just address it as honestly as we could. And we did experience some flack, but I think that is the nature of the game sometimes. Yeah. And that's why we do it. So Aaron, I hope that answered your question. And if it doesn't, feel free to jump into the chat and ask again, or ask for more clarifying questions. A question that we have from Tex is, do product and community team members work together on user onboarding and user journey? And if so, how?
So the answer is yes. For example, part of our team members actually go through the app onboarding or content thoroughly, not to look at whether the content makes sense, the language makes sense. So all of these is a subset of onboarding. If you're asking more about helping the customers actually set up the product, we don't have sync events to do that, but the team is always there on standby to see whether someone is having problems through public channels, right? So that's where the support aspect of community is available.
Right, and I would say from the Commsor side, every step of the way, I am leaning on our wonderful community team to help me with what should we build, how should it look? Should it look like this? What do you think of this? I'll stop messaging them when they ask me to stop messaging them. This is how I treat that partnership. So that's a really, really great question, Tex. And again, feel free to pipe in if you have more questions. So I think we're actually gonna, oh, sorry. Yeah, go.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I think I'm getting some oh hi, and we love it from the community people that I work with. And thank you for all your support. So we are in our last 2 minutes. So I'm probably gonna get to maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So if you have a burning thought on your mind, now would be the time to throw it into the chat or into QA. So my last question is actually also from our QA, and it's from Mandy, and it says, when you're part of a company that sees community as primarily a support function, what are strategies you can employ to shift that perspective to seeing community as a place that can shape the product?
So,
and Mandy, that was a great question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it goes back to what I said about understanding the challenges. So last year, early January, I tried to download our Zendesk tickets and prioritize them into buckets, because I know that if I can help the team prioritize issues, that will add value to them. And I think it's just a matter of what tools do you have in your possession that you can actually use to help alleviate some of the people problem. Because the more you do it, the more you help them and the more they're willing to help you, right? Because if you are getting like 10,000 tickets in a month, that actually is a problem rooted upstream, right? So how do you bring that back to the people building the product and educate them that, hey, this is a Band-Aid. Like the way to fix this is if we can collaborate better and fix the problem much sooner in the process.
Right. I had a community person at my previous job do the exact same thing, where she pulled an entire quarter's worth of issues and did the math and figured out that if every single time somebody calls our support team for a problem about XYZ, whatever, it costs us $35. That just means you wasted $400,000 of our company's money.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
In 1 quarter. Thank you. So please let's fix it together, because now I know a lot about this problem. I'm essentially a technical person fully involved in it. what can I do to help you? And that was really her tone with it, is that she approached it with, how can I help? Like, I'm seeing this problem. What can I do to help you solve it? And treated it like it was a collaboration. So Mandy, feel free to reach out after this chat if there are more thoughts on your mind. I would love to talk more about how to help product people see the value that they could get out of community. And I know Mark would too. So with that, we are at time. Thank you so much, Mark. I think you actually have one last thing that you wanted to plug before we jumped off, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, everyone here is building community. So currently working on tools, course program around making community-led efforts. So I guess that this will resonate to a lot of people. So if you're interested, I'll be around Twitter, my new favorite platform, and happy to connect.
Me too. I will also be on Twitter later. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark. This was super informative. I'm super bullish on community-led product teams. I think it's the way we win in 2021 and 2025 forever and ever. And thank you so much, Community Club, for giving us this wonderful platform. So Cole.
Thank you so much for having me.